The Alpha's claws tore through the silver grave in pure rage. Each strike echoed like thunder. "No one hides my son from me and lives!" On the bare ground, Hazaria knelt, her hands bleeding, her voice breaking. "Stop! Please! You don't understand!" But he didn't listen. The grave cracked open, and then a small voice from inside. "Father?" Silence fell. The Alpha froze. His world shattered in a heartbeat. Because the grave he destroyed was the one place that kept his son alive. If you love intense Alpha romance stories filled with secrets, pain, and unexpected love, don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay till the end. Chapter 1. The forest had long forgotten what laughter sounded like. It stood tall and ancient, its twisted trees whispering secrets to the wind, its shadows swallowing light before it could touch the ground. No villagers dared to cross its edge after sunset. Even hunters, bold and reckless, turned back before reaching its heart. Because deep within that forest lived a woman people only spoke about in fear, Hazaria. They called her many things: the Cursed One, the Grave Walker, the woman who sleeps beside death. No one knew exactly where she came from. Some said she was born during a blood moon. Others claimed she had once belonged to a noble pack, but was cast out after tragedy followed her like a shadow. There were even whispers that everyone who had ever loved her had died. Hazaria never corrected any of those stories. She simply stayed away. Her home was not a home in the way others understood it. It was a small, broken structure hidden between massive, crooked trees, built from worn wood and stone. Vines crawled over its walls like they were trying to claim it back for the earth. Inside there was little, just a rough bed, a small fire pit, and a few tools she had gathered over the years. She did not need much. People who expect nothing rarely suffer disappointment. Each morning, Hazaria woke before the sun rose, not because she loved the dawn, but because she trusted the dark more than the light. She moved like a shadow through the forest, silent and watchful. Her long, dark hair flowed behind her, often tangled from restless nights. Her sharp eyes missed nothing, not the snap of a twig, not the shift of the wind, not the scent of danger. Oh, beauty followed her like a curse. Even in worn clothes and dirt-stained skin, Hazaria was striking. Her features were soft yet fierce, her presence impossible to ignore. It was the kind of beauty that drew attention, and attention was something she had learned to avoid. Because attention brought people, and people brought pain. Hazaria did not trust easily. In fact, she did not trust at all. Not after the betrayal, not after the blood, not after the night she learned that promises could turn into weapons. That was why she lived alone. That was why she never went near villages, never answered calls for help, never allowed herself to care. Care was dangerous. Care was the beginning of loss. And yet, there was one thing she cared about: the grave. It sat not far from her shelter, hidden beneath a clearing where the trees opened just enough for moonlight to fall. Unlike the wild chaos of the forest, this place was peaceful, almost sacred. The grave was unlike any other. It was lined with silver. Thin sheets of silver carefully placed along the inside walls, reflecting even the smallest light. Around it, Hazaria had arranged stones in a perfect circle, each one smooth and deliberate, as if placed with quiet reverence. Wildflowers grew around it, not by accident, but because she planted them herself. Every single one. White for peace, purple for sorrow, blue for memory. Hazaria had dug that grave with her own hands, day after day, bleeding, sweating, enduring, not for someone else, for herself. She would sometimes sit beside it for hours, silent, still, as if listening to something no one else could hear. It was not fear that drove her. It was acceptance. Hazaria believed her life would end soon, not because she was weak, but because fate had never been kind to her. She had seen too much death, too much loss, too much darkness to believe she would escape it. So she prepared, not out of despair, but out of control. If death was coming for her, then she would meet it on her own terms. Everything changed the day she found the boy. It began with the scent of blood, not animal, not wild, human, faint, but fresh. Hazaria froze mid-step, her senses sharpening instantly. Her body tensed, instincts screaming at her to turn back, to avoid whatever danger lurked ahead. But something held her there. A sound. Soft. Broken. A whimper. She moved quickly, her feet barely making a sound against the forest floor. Branches brushed against her skin as she followed the trail, her eyes scanning every shadow, every movement. And then she saw him, a small boy, no older than 5 or 6, collapsed near the roots of a fallen tree. His clothes were torn, stained with dirt and blood. His breathing was uneven, his tiny body trembling with weakness. He looked fragile, too fragile for a place like this. Hazaria stopped a few steps away. Her first instinct was to leave. This was not her problem. This was exactly the kind of situation she avoided. Something that would pull her into a world she had already walked away from. A child meant people. People meant trouble. And trouble always found a way to destroy everything. She turned, took one step away, then another. The boy coughed, a weak, painful sound that echoed through the stillness. Hazaria froze, when her hands slowly clenched at her sides. For a moment, the forest seemed to hold its breath with her. Then with a quiet exhale, she turned back. "Just this once," she muttered under her breath. "Just this once." She approached him carefully and knelt beside his small body. Up close, she could see how pale he was, how his lips were slightly blue from cold and exhaustion. He was dying, slowly, quietly, alone. Hazaria's jaw tightened. She hated that sight, more than anything. Without another thought, she lifted him gently into her arms. He was lighter than she expected, his body limp against hers as if he had already given up. "Not today," she whispered softly. "Not while I'm here." Bringing him to her shelter was a risk, a big one. But leaving him there would have meant certain death. And despite everything she believed, she could not walk away from that. The days that followed were unlike anything Hazaria had experienced in years. She cleaned his wounds carefully, using herbs she had gathered over time. She fed him small portions, watched over him through the night, and made sure the fire never went out. At first, the boy barely spoke. He was scared, confused. His eyes would dart around the room, searching for something or someone that wasn't there. "Where am I?" he finally asked one night, his voice barely above a whisper. Hazaria hesitated, then answered simply, "Somewhere safe." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded, as if that was enough. Days turned into something softer, quieter, warmer. The boy began to smile. At first it was small, hesitant, uncertain. But then it grew. He laughed at little things, asked questions she didn't always answer, followed her around like a small shadow, curious about everything she did. Hazaria found herself watching him more than she should. She told herself it was temporary, that once he was strong enough, he would leave, that this was just a moment, nothing more. But moments have a way of becoming something else. One evening, as the sky turned gold and the forest softened under the fading light, the boy wandered toward the clearing, toward the grave. Hazaria noticed immediately. Her heart skipped. "Stop!" she called out, sharper than she intended. The boy froze, turning to look at her with wide eyes. "That place," she said, her voice quieter now. "It's not for playing." He tilted his head slightly. "Why?" Hazaria opened her mouth to answer, then stopped. Oh, because she didn't have one he would understand. Instead, she walked over, her steps slow and careful. "It's just important," she said. The boy looked at the grave again, then back at her. After a moment, he smiled, a soft, innocent smile that carried no fear, no judgment. "It's pretty," he said. Hazaria blinked. No one had ever called it that before. She looked at the silver lining, the flowers, the carefully placed stones, then back at him. For the first time in a long while, her expression softened. "It is," she admitted quietly. From that day on, something changed. The grave no longer felt like a place of ending. It became something else, a hiding place, a secret, a space the boy found fascinating. And without realizing it, Hazaria, the woman who walked with death, had begun to protect life. Chapter 2. The kingdom had never been this loud before, not with celebration, not with victory, but with fear. The palace gates stood open, guards rushing in and out like a storm had broken loose inside the walls. Messengers ran through the halls, their voices urgent, their faces pale. Servants whispered in corners, their hands trembling as they spoke the same words over and over again. The prince is missing. The Alpha's son is gone. Inside the throne hall, silence felt heavier than noise, because at the center of it all stood the Alpha. His presence alone was enough to make the strongest warriors lower their heads. Tall, powerful, unshaken, but not today. His eyes burned with something far more dangerous than anger. Fear. Say it again. His voice was low, deadly. The soldier before him swallowed hard, his body shaking as he forced the words out. My Alpha. The prince was taken near the eastern border. We believe it was the enemy kingdom. For a moment, no one breathed. Then, the Alpha moved, his claws extended without warning, slamming into the stone pillar beside him. The impact cracked the surface instantly, dust falling to the ground as the hall echoed with the force of his rage. They took my son, he growled, his voice dark and shaking. No one dared to speak, because everyone in that room understood one thing. This was not just a father searching for his child. This was a king on the edge of war. Gather every warrior, he commanded. Burn through every village, every forest, every hidden path, if you must. His eyes lifted, cold, merciless. Find him. And just like that, the kingdom erupted. Soldiers spread across the land like wildfire. Villages were searched without warning. Doors were broken open. Families were dragged outside and questioned under trembling fear. No place was too small. No place was too far. The forest, the same one people feared to enter, was no exception. Search everything. Leave nothing untouched. Groups of warriors pushed into the trees, their weapons drawn, their senses sharp. The deeper they went, the quieter it became. Even the animals seemed to disappear, because something about that forest felt wrong. And yet, they kept moving, because fear of the Alpha was far greater than fear of the unknown. But they weren't the only ones searching. Far beyond the Alpha's reach, another force moved in silence, the enemy kingdom. Unlike the Alpha's men, they did not shout or destroy. They hunted, quietly, carefully, like shadows slipping through the dark. The boy must not be found alive, one of them whispered. He is the heir. If he returns, the war is lost before it begins. Their mission was simple. Finish what they started, and they were getting closer, back in the forest. Hazaria felt it before she saw it, the shift in the air, the tension, the quiet that didn't feel natural anymore. She stood outside her shelter, her body still, her eyes scanning the trees. Something was coming. No. Multiple somethings. Behind her, the boy played softly with a small piece of carved wood she had given him. His laughter, light and innocent, clashed painfully with the danger creeping closer. Hazaria turned toward him, her expression tightening. Come here, she said quietly. He looked up immediately. He had learned her tone. Without question, he ran to her. Hazaria knelt in front of him, placing her hands gently on his shoulders. Listen to me, she said, her voice calm, but firm. No matter what happens, you stay hidden. Do you understand? The boy blinked. Are we playing a game? He asked softly. Hazaria hesitated, then nodded once. Yes. That was easier, safer. His face lit up slightly. I'll win, he said. Something in her chest tightened. I know you will, she replied. The sounds came next, faint, but unmistakable. Footsteps, many of them. Hazaria stood quickly, her mind already moving ahead. She had no time, no safe path, no escape. Only one choice, the grave. She grabbed the boy's hand and led him quickly through the trees toward the clearing. The moment they arrived, the silver-lined grave reflected the dim light, glowing faintly beneath the sky. The boy's eyes widened. The pretty place, he whispered. Hazaria knelt beside it, pushing aside the covering she had placed over it earlier. Inside, she said. The boy looked at her, confused this time. But you said, I know what I said, she interrupted gently. Her voice softened. This is the safest place. He hesitated, just for a second. Then he nodded, because he trusted her. Hazaria helped him climb inside carefully, adjusting the soft cloth and dried leaves she had placed there. She had never imagined it would be used like this. But now, it was the only thing standing between him and death. Stay quiet, she whispered, no matter what you hear. The boy looked up at her. Then, slowly, he reached out and held her hand. Will you come back? He asked. Hazaria froze. And for a brief moment, all the walls she had built around herself felt like they were breaking. She forced a small nod. Yes. Then she covered the grave, sealing him inside, just as the forest went silent. Hazaria stood, turned, and waited. They arrived within seconds. First, the Alpha soldiers, their presence loud, forceful, tearing through the trees as they surrounded her without hesitation. Weapons raised, eyes sharp. Don't move! Hazaria didn't. She simply stood there, her expression unreadable. Where is the boy? One of them demanded. She said nothing. Answer! Still nothing. A sword was raised toward her. Speak, or we make you. Hazaria's gaze didn't waver. I don't know what you're talking about. It was a lie, a dangerous one, and she knew it, but she didn't move, didn't break, didn't look toward the grave, because one glance would be enough. Moments later, more footsteps approached, heavier, slower. The air changed instantly. The soldiers stepped aside, heads lowering. The Alpha had arrived. His eyes landed on Hazaria immediately, sharp, piercing, searching. Where is my son? He asked. His voice was calm, but beneath it was something far more terrifying. Hazaria met his gaze, unflinching. I don't know. The lie hung between them, heavy, dangerous. The Alpha stepped closer, slowly, deliberately. You're in my forest, he said. You stand where my son was last seen. His eyes darkened. And you expect me to believe you know nothing? Hazaria didn't answer, because the truth would get the boy killed. The wind shifted, the tension tightened, and beneath the earth, inside the silver grave, the boy held his breath, hidden, silent, safe. But for now, Chapter 3. The forest held its breath. No wind, no birds, no movement, only tension, thick and suffocating. Hazaria stood surrounded. The Alpha's men formed a wide circle around her, their weapons ready, their eyes locked on every move she made. There was no escape. Not that she was looking for one. Running would only make things worse. And worse was something she could not afford. The Alpha stood a few steps away from her, still, silent, watching. There was something unsettling about the way he looked at her. Not just with anger, but with instinct. Like a predator sensing something hidden beneath the surface. Something not yet seen. Search the area, he ordered quietly. His men moved immediately. Branches were pushed aside. The ground was inspected. Every shadow was questioned. Every scent followed. Hazaria didn't move, didn't react. Honor didn't even breathe too loudly. But inside, her heart was pounding. Not for herself, for the boy. Stay quiet. Please stay quiet. One of the soldiers moved closer to the clearing, closer, to the grave. Hazaria's fingers twitched slightly at her side. A small movement, almost nothing. But the Alpha noticed. His eyes narrowed. Stop! The soldier froze instantly. The Alpha took a slow step forward, his gaze never leaving Hazaria. Then another. What's there? He asked. Hazaria's voice came out calm, too calm. Nothing. Silence followed, heavy, suspicious. The Alpha tilted his head slightly, studying her. Then, without warning, he moved. In a blur of speed, he stepped past her, heading straight toward the clearing. No! The word slipped out before Hazaria could stop it. Too late. The Alpha stopped, slowly turned back. That was it. That one word, that one mistake. Now he knew. His eyes darkened instantly, something cold and dangerous settling in them. Move, he said. Hazaria stepped in front of him, for the first time since they arrived. Don't. she said quietly. The soldiers reacted immediately, raising their weapons. Get back! But she didn't move. The alpha's expression hardened. You dare stand in my way? Hazaria held his gaze. Yes. A dangerous silence fell over the clearing. Why? He asked. She didn't answer. Because there was no answer he would accept. For a brief moment, they simply stood there, facing each other, two forces refusing to yield. Then, a sound, soft, faint, barely there. Crack. It came from beneath the ground. Everything froze. The alpha's head snapped toward the source. The grave. Another sound. Slightly louder this time. A crack. Like something shifting, moving, breathing. Hazaria's heart dropped. No. The alpha stepped forward slowly, his eyes locked on the grave now. Every instinct inside him screaming. What is that? One of the soldiers whispered. No one answered. Another sound. Tap. From inside. The alpha's expression changed. Not just suspicion now. Something deeper. Something primal. Recognition. My son, he whispered. Then everything exploded. With a roar that shook the trees, the alpha lunged forward, his claws extending as raw fury took over. You hid him from me? His claws struck the silver grave with brutal force. Crack. The structure split slightly under the impact, the silver lining bending, the carefully placed stones scattering across the ground. Hazaria rushed forward. Stop! But the alpha didn't hear her. Another strike. Harder. Aaron angrier. Crack! The grave began to break apart. The flowers were crushed beneath his feet, the soil torn open like it meant nothing. You think you can take what's mine and hide it? He roared. Hazaria grabbed his arm. You're going to hurt him! That made him pause, just for a second. Then, a voice, small, weak, frightened. Father? Everything stopped. The world itself seemed to fall silent. The alpha froze mid-motion, his claws still raised, his breath uneven, slowly, very slowly. He looked down. The broken grave shifted. The remaining soil crumbled inward, and from within, a small hand reached out, covered in dirt, shaking, alive. The alpha dropped to his knees instantly. The next moment felt like a dream. He tore away the remaining pieces of the grave, more carefully now, his hands no longer driven by rage, but by desperation. And then, he saw him, his son, curled inside the silver-lined space, surrounded by cloth and leaves, his small body trembling but unharmed, alive. The alpha's breath caught in his throat. For a moment, he couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't think. Then he reached out, his hands shaking as he pulled the boy into his arms. You're alive, he whispered. The boy clung to him weakly. I was hiding, he said softly. The alpha held him tighter, as if letting go would make him disappear. Behind them, silence. The soldiers stood frozen, shock written across their faces. And Hazaria. She stood a few steps away, still, watching. Her chest rose and fell slowly, and this time there was no confusion, only fury. You, he said, his voice low and dangerous. The storm had only just begun. Chapter 4. The air in the clearing turned heavy the moment the alpha's eyes locked on Hazaria. He still held his son tightly in his arms, but the relief that had softened his face only moments ago was already fading. In its place rose something darker, anger, sharp and unforgiving. To him, the truth seemed simple. His son had been hidden. This woman had stood her ground, lied to his face, and protected a secret she had no right to keep. Slowly he rose to his feet, still holding the boy close. His gaze never left Hazaria, and with each step he took toward her, the tension in the air tightened like a drawn blade. The soldiers around them shifted uneasily, sensing the danger that was about to unfold. You hid him from me, the alpha said, his voice low but filled with restrained fury. Hazaria did not step back. She stood where she was, her expression calm, though her heart was anything but. She had expected this. From the moment the grave was broken open, she knew this was coming. There was no explanation she could give that would immediately make sense to a father who had just found his missing child buried beneath the ground. I kept him alive, she replied quietly. That was all she said, but it was not enough. The alpha's eyes darkened, his grip tightening slightly around the boy as anger surged again. Alive? He repeated, his voice rising. You buried my son in a grave and you call that keeping him alive? In a flash, he moved. Before anyone could react, he closed the distance between them and grabbed Hazaria by the throat, lifting her slightly off the ground. The soldiers froze, none daring to interfere. His control was slipping, driven by fear, rage, and the thought of what could have happened if he had arrived too late. Hazaria gasped softly, her hands instinctively gripping his wrist, but she did not fight him. Her eyes met his, steady even as her breath became strained. She could see it clearly now, the fear behind his anger. This was not just a king punishing an offender. This was a father who had almost lost everything. I should kill you for this, he growled, and he meant it. But before he could do anything more, a small voice broke through the moment. Stop! The word was weak, but it carried enough force to make the alpha freeze. His son shifted in his arms, pushing slightly against him, despite his exhaustion. Don't hurt her, the boy said, his voice trembling but determined. The alpha blinked, his grip loosening just a little. She saved me, the boy continued. The bad men were chasing me. I was scared. She found me. She helped me. Silence followed. Hazaria's feet touched the ground again as the alpha slowly released her. She staggered slightly but remained standing, her hand moving to her throat as she took a steady breath. The boy looked between them, his small face filled with confusion. She told me to hide, he added. She said it was a game, so they wouldn't find me. The alpha said nothing. He simply stared at Hazaria, as if seeing her for the first time. You didn't take him? He asked after a moment, his voice quieter now, though still guarded. Hazaria shook her head slowly. I found him, she said. Alone. Injured. I didn't know who he was. There was no hesitation in her voice, no fear, just truth. I don't belong to your kingdom, she continued. I don't follow your wars. He was just a child who needed help. The alpha's jaw tightened slightly as he processed her words. Everything about this situation was shifting, turning into something far more complicated than he had expected. The woman he had been ready to kill had saved his son, protected him, hidden him from enemies who would have finished what they started. And yet, she had lied to him, stood against him, hidden the truth even when he demanded it. Gratitude and suspicion clashed within him, neither one strong enough to fully take control. You should have told me, he said finally. Hazaria met his gaze again. And if I did, she asked quietly, would you have listened, or would you have done exactly what you just tried to do? That question lingered in the air, because they both knew the answer. The alpha exhaled slowly, his anger no longer as sharp as before, but not gone either. He looked down at his son, who was now holding on to him tightly, his small fingers gripping his clothes as if afraid he might disappear again. Then his eyes shifted back to Hazaria. You're coming with us, he said. It was not a request. Hazaria frowned slightly. No. The refusal came instantly. The soldiers tensed again, surprised by her boldness. But the alpha did not react with immediate anger this time. Instead, he studied her carefully, as if weighing something in his mind. You're not safe here, he said. If my enemies were close enough to find him, they will return. And next time, they won't leave witnesses. Hazaria said nothing, because she knew he was right. The forest had already changed. The silence she once trusted now carried danger. Her hidden world had been exposed, and there was no going back to the life she had before. Still, leaving was not easy. This place, no matter how lonely, had been hers. But now, that was no longer true. The boy looked at her then, his eyes soft, hopeful. Come with us, he said gently. That simple request carried more weight than the alpha's command. Hazaria hesitated. Then slowly, she nodded. Only until he's safe, she said. The alpha didn't argue. For now, that was enough. He turned, signaling his men to prepare to move. The tension in the clearing began to fade, replaced by a strange, uncertain calm. The storm had passed, but something new had taken its place. As they began their journey back to the kingdom, Hazaria walked behind them, her eyes lingering briefly on the broken remains of the silver grave. Where the place she had once prepared for her death had become the reason she was now walking towards something unknown. And for the first time in a long while, Hazaria wasn't sure what awaited her next. Chapter 5. The kingdom did not welcome Hazaria with warmth. From the moment she stepped through the palace gates, she could feel it. The stares, the whispers, the quiet judgment that followed her like a shadow. Servants lowered their voices when she passed. Guards watched her a little too closely. Even the walls of the palace felt unfamiliar, too polished, too alive with people and movement. It was nothing like the forest, nothing like the silence she was used to. Hazaria walked carefully, her senses alert, her posture guarded. She did not belong here, and everyone knew it, including her. The clothes she wore, the way she moved, even the look in her eyes set her apart from the rest. This was a place of order, of rules, of hierarchy, and she was none of those things. She was an outsider. But there was one person who did not see her that way. The boy. From the moment they arrived, he refused to leave her side. Even when the palace healers came to check his wounds, even when servants tried to lead him away to prepare a proper room for him, he held on to Hazaria as though letting go would make her disappear. "She stays," he insisted more than once, his small hands gripping her tightly. And no one dared to argue with the Alpha's son. Hazaria found herself standing in places she had never imagined, inside large halls, beside decorated chambers, surrounded by luxury that felt strange against her skin. Yet through it all, the boy's presence grounded her. He trusted her, completely. And that was something she wasn't used to. At night, when the palace grew quieter, he would sit beside her, asking small questions in his soft voice. "Will you leave tomorrow?" he asked one evening. Hazaria paused before answering. "I don't know," she said honestly. The boy frowned slightly. "I don't want you to go." Something in her chest tightened at those words. She looked away briefly before replying, "We'll see." But deep down, she already knew leaving wouldn't be as simple as she once believed. The Alpha watched all of this closely. At first, he kept his distance. Hazaria was still a question he had not fully answered. A woman who had lied to him, stood against him, and yet saved the most important person in his life. It was not something he could ignore, nor something he could easily accept. So he observed. He watched the way his son clung to her, the way she moved through the palace without asking for anything, the way she kept her distance from everyone else. And most of all, he watched the way she never once tried to gain anything from her actions. One evening, he found her standing alone on a balcony overlooking the kingdom. The sky was painted in soft shades of orange and gold, the fading light casting a quiet glow across the land. Hazaria didn't turn when he approached. She had already sensed him. "You don't belong here," he said after a moment. It wasn't an insult, just a fact. Hazaria gave a faint nod. "I know." Silence settled between them, but it was different from before. Not as sharp, not as hostile. "Why did you really help him?" the Alpha asked. Hazaria's eyes remained on the horizon. "Because he needed help," she replied simply. "That's not enough," he said. This time she turned to look at him. "For you, maybe," she said quietly. But for me, it is." The Alpha studied her for a long moment, as if searching for something hidden beneath her words. And for the first time, he didn't see an enemy. He saw someone, broken in a way he couldn't yet understand. "You built that grave for yourself," he said suddenly. Hazaria's expression shifted slightly, just for a second. "Yes," she answered. "Why?" She looked away again, and for a moment, it seemed like she wouldn't answer. But then, "Because I didn't expect to live long enough to need anything else," she said. The honesty in her voice was quiet, but heavy, and it stayed with him. Days passed, and slowly the palace began to feel less like a prison and more like something uncertain, something changing. Hazaria still kept to herself, still avoided unnecessary conversations, but the sharp edges around her began to soften. And not for everyone, just for him, the boy. He laughed more now, played more, and often he would drag Hazaria along with him, insisting she join in his small games, his simple joys. At first she resisted, but over time, She gave in, little by little, and the alpha noticed. One morning he watched from a distance as his son ran across the courtyard, pulling Hazaria behind him, both of them caught in a rare moment of lightness. For a brief second, something unfamiliar settled in his chest. Something calm, but peace never lasts forever. The whispers in the palace began to grow. Not about the boy, but about Hazaria. She's not ordinary. She appeared out of nowhere. Do you really think she just found the prince? The alpha heard them, and though he ignored most of it, a part of him listened. Because deep down, he knew something wasn't right. There were things about Hazaria that didn't add up. The way she moved, the way she sensed danger before it came, the way she carried pain like it was part of her very being. She was hiding something, something important, and yet, he didn't push. Not yet. Instead, he did something no one expected. He returned to the forest, alone. The clearing looked different now, broken. The silver grave lay in ruins, the flowers crushed, the careful structure destroyed by his own hands. For a long moment, the alpha stood there in silence. Then slowly, he knelt. Days later, when Hazaria was brought back to that same place, she stopped the moment she saw it. The grave was no longer broken. It had been rebuilt, stronger, more beautiful. The silver lining gleamed brighter than before, polished and carefully set, and the stones around it were placed with precision, forming a perfect circle once again. New flowers had been planted, more vibrant, more alive than the ones that had been lost. It was no longer just a grave. It looked like something honored, respected. Hazaria stood still, her eyes fixed on it, unable to speak. You said it was important? The alpha's voice came from behind her. She turned slowly. I destroyed it, he continued, so I rebuilt it. Hazaria looked back at the grave, something deep and unspoken moving through her. Why? She asked softly. The alpha stepped closer, stopping just beside her. Because it saved my son, he said. Silence followed, but this time, it wasn't heavy. For the first time since they met, something shifted between them. Not trust, not yet, but something close. Hazaria lowered her gaze slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. Thank you. And for the first time, she meant it.
If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and support the creator so the next part can be released.